Now this is the third lecture of the AWS MCP full course. In this lecture, I'm going to show you how you can configure Amazon Q CLI as the client for your AWS CloudFormation MCP server, and through just natural language queries, how our MCP server is going to create the CloudFormation stack and deploy it. Now, if you missed the first and second lectures, please check out in the link in the description of this video. Now, before we proceed ahead, please note this video series is part of my best-selling Udemy course on Build AI Agents with Amazon Bedrock Agents, Crew AI, and MCP. Please do go ahead and check out this course. The link is in the description. Also, if you're looking to learn Amazon Bedrock and Generative AI, you can also check out my other course on Udemy with more than 20,000 students. Okay, now let's continue. Now, as part of the demo, I'm going to show you how to configure AWS CloudFormation MCP server with Amazon Q CLI as the client. So let's say we have a developer and he uses VS Code as his IDE, and that's going to be our host. Then what we're going to do is we're going to install the Amazon Q CLI on the VS Code, and which will act as our client. So now we have the MCP host and client. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to install AWS MCP CloudFormation server, and we're going to deploy this server that has been created by AWS on our local laptop. So when the developer asks any questions using natural language, this MCP server is going to translate that natural language query from the developer into API calls and interact with the AWS CloudFormation service. Now let's go and understand this through an example. Let's say I'm a cloud engineer and I use AWS CloudFormation to manage the resources for my application. Now I could have different questions, say, and these are some of the sample questions AWS has provided. Maybe create a new S3 bucket with versioning and encryption enabled. List all EC2 instances in the production environment. So what I can do is through my ID VS Code, where I have installed the Amazon Q CLI, I could pose questions like this in natural language. And in our case, we're going to say create CloudFormation stack with API gateway, Lambda, and S3. Now, once I have sent this request, this question in natural language will be sent by the client Amazon Q CLI to AWS MCP CloudFormation server. And this CloudFormation server is going to convert the natural language queries into tool invocation, which are basically just API. So if you see, these are some of the tools that it exposes. Create resources. So basically this tool allows you to create any service. So you can see some of the tools have been highlighted here. So first one is create resources. So once you pose a question in natural language, like in our case, it's going to create all the resources by making an API call to the AWS CloudFormation service. Similarly, you can use get resources, and here list all the EC2 instances in the production environment. So once the cloud engineer sends that request, AWS MCP CloudFormation server converts that into a tool call, maybe get resource, makes a call to this AWS CloudFormation service, retrieves the data and sends it back to the cloud engineer through this Amazon Q CLI client. So similarly, you can see other tools as well, update resources, delete and list resources. So that's what I'm going to show you as part of the demo. I'll see you in the next lecture. Thank you. Now, the first thing you have to do is you have to install an IAM role for your CLI. So for that, what you can do is you can go to your AWS account and just search for IAM and click here. And we can just click on this users and then just click on create user, and let's just call it as MCP user, and we'll just say next. Okay, it says it already exists. So let me just say MCP_01 and just click on next, and I'll attach policy directly, and I'll just attach admin access, scroll down, click on this next, and then just click on create user. So now we are on the users, so just click on this MCP01 user and then just click on the security credentials here and just say create access key, and you'll just need it for CLI. Just click on the CLI, just click on this confirmation and next, and create access key. So you can see my access key and secret key have been created. So I can just copy it from here and then just say AWS configure. Now we can see here is that it will ask you whether if it can run this particular command for configuring the AWS CLI with an IAM rule. You need to run this AWS configure, and you can say yes, no, or trust. And if you say trust, it will keep running the future commands as well. If you say yes, it will just run that particular command. So let me just say yes. So now you can see it's not showing me anything. So I can just click here and I can just paste my access key, and let me just say enter, and then I'll just go back and take a look at my secret key. So here is my secret key. I'll just copy that, and then I'll just paste that as well here, and then just say enter, and then I have to provide the region. So I'll just say US-East-1, and then I'll just enter, and then it will ask what format I need this data in, and I'll just leave that as blank, and then I'll just say enter. So it's showing that I already have an IAM role attached to this particular CLI, but if you have, then it's going to take the same one. If not, then you can follow what I have shown you here, and your CLI will be configured. So once you have provided your configuration details, then at the bottom of the VS Code, you should be able to see something like this: AWS profile default. And if you have created a profile with a different name, that should be okay. So that's pretty much it from this lecture. I'll see you in the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, now let's go ahead and install the MCP servers. So if you just go to this link, or what you can do is, so just go to Google and search for AWS MCP servers, and you will see a whole bunch of links. Just click on this welcome to AWS MCP server, and they might change the URL. So just look around and see what's the right URL, because they're constantly updating these servers and web pages, etc. Okay, now you have the AWS MCP servers. So we can just take a look at a couple of them. Maybe we'll look at the CloudFormation server. So let me just go under infrastructure deployment and just click here, and you can see AWS CloudFormation MCP server. So if I just click on this, so it will give all the details related to AWS CloudFormation MCP server. So these are the features: resource creation, resource reading, and some of the others. These are some of the prerequisites, how you need to install it with VS Code, cursor, and this is the configuration file. And then finally, these are the tools that are available as part of this server. So we have discussed about the tool capability that the MCP server exposes. So you can create resources, maybe S3 bucket, Lambda. You can get details but related to particular resource. So get the configuration of an EC2 instance. You can update resources, delete, list, and a whole bunch of other things. And we're going to try out some of these. Okay. Now let me just go back to my VS Code, and you can see I have just written some steps on what we need to do. So first we need to install, let's say we are installing the CloudFormation server. So install the MCP CloudFormation server. Then what I've done is I've taken this link and just pasted it here. So first we'll install the AWS CloudFormation server. Second, we're going to configure the AWS CloudFormation server with our Amazon Q CLI by creating this configuration file that we just saw here. So if I just scroll up, this is the configuration file that we need to set up. And just remember here, AWS profile, it will be the CLI profile that you have set. And in most of the cases, if you don't set, it's going to be default once you have provided the IAM role to the CLI. Okay. And then finally, the third thing you need to do is you also need to make sure your AWS CLI is configured with the right IAM role. And all this installation we are going to do by providing natural language commands to our Q CLI. So let me just first copy this, and let me just make it full screen. Okay, so I'm going to say install AWS CloudFormation server, and I will give you this URL. So even if you don't give this URL, it should be okay. It will take a little bit of time to install this, but if you just give the URL, it might just be easier. So I'll just say enter. So you can see here it's using the tool execute bash, and it's saying it wants to clone this particular URL. So if I say T, which means trust. It's going to run all the commands that are required to execute this. If I just say Y, then it will just run only this particular command. Okay, so let me just say yes for now. And it's cloning this particular MCP server. So it's asking me for the username, but I don't have the username for this. So maybe I'll just say enter, and you can say authentication failed, and it will just figure out another way to clone this repository. So I'll just say maybe trust this time. Okay, so it's reading this directory, and so you can see it's running a whole bunch of commands by itself. So I think it's installing the Boto 3. Now it has ran some other commands, so it's installing this pipex is installed, and it's saying, okay, now let me install the CloudFormation MCP server, and it's installed this AWS Lab CFN MCP server, and then it's doing some other things. So you can see, excellent. I need to create the MCP configuration file now. So what it has done is, so if we can just push this a little down, and so it has completed this install AWS CloudWatch MCP server. Now it has to configure our Amazon Q CLI with the CloudWatch MCP server, and for that it needs to define this MCP configuration file. So in my case, it's just showing that it's already created this MCP configuration file. In your case, when you provide the prompt, maybe it does not, because every time it takes a different approach. So make sure that you provide this prompt if it has not configured this MCP configuration file. So make sure all the 3 tasks are completed by QCLI. So let me just go back now and let's see where it has reached. So I think now it's saying it wants to configure this Amazon Q MCP JSON. So this is basically the configuration file. So if I just go here, so you'll see this is this particular file it's talking about, where we configure QCLI with the MCP server. So it will have something very similar, except this my profile. So here it should be default or any other profile that you have set. So if I just scroll down, and you can see here AWS profile is default, which is what I have here for my CLI. Okay, so now it's saying create the MCP configuration file with this CloudFormation server. So I'm going to say trust. So it's just reading this configuration file. So it's saying the AWS credentials and regions are properly configured. Now let's test the MCP server. Okay, so it's saying server started successfully. Test CloudFormation MCP server execution. Server started successfully. So here it's saying that AWS CloudFormation MCP server has been successfully installed and configured, and then it's giving details of what all has been configured. So it's saying this package AWS CFN MCP server version 1.0.6 has been installed, and it's a global command. Then it has created a configuration file at this path, and it is using AWS profile default, and then we have set the region as well. So what are the features available as part of this CloudFormation MCP server? And it's giving some details. Next, restart your QCLI to load the MCP configuration, and then you can ask some questions. So let me just reload this QCLI, and let me just say /quit, and now I can say Q chat, and you can see it's loading the MCP server. Okay, now let's go ahead and ask it some questions. Now our MCP server is ready, so I have written some questions here. So we had earlier seen some of the tools that are available as part of this MCP server, and if I just scroll down, you can see here create resources, get resources, update resources. So we're going to try some of them, and it has also given some sample questions that you can ask. Okay, so I have just written some of my own. So let's create an S3 bucket with versioning and encryption enabled, and the bucket name is Rahul MCP test server, and I just given some random name because the S3 bucket needs to be globally unique. Okay, so I'll go back and I'll just paste this question and I'll say enter. So it's saying I will create an S3 bucket with this name, and then it's saying, okay, this is the configuration it's going to create. So you can see we have the CloudFormation template that it has created in JSON, and this is the bucket name that we had given, and it wants me to execute this. So I'll say yes. So it's saying the S3 bucket creation is in progress. Let me check the status and confirm successfully. And let me say yes. So perfect. Your S3 bucket Rahul MCP test server has been successfully created with following features. So now I'm on the AWS console. Let me just search for S3 and let's see if our S3 bucket has been created. So now I'm on the S3 bucket, and if I just search by creation date, you can see our Rahul MCP test server 090909 has been created through this particular command. So this is the one which we have created. Now let's go ahead and ask it something more meaningful. We'll say create a YAML template for AWS CloudFormation stack with REST, AWS API Gateway, Lambda, and S3. And then we're going to ask it to deploy this template. So let me just copy this question, and this will be part of the create template toolset. Okay, so I will just say maybe clear. Okay, so I think this is not working, but okay, so it's saying the terminal has been cleared. Now let me just paste this question. So I said create YAML template for CloudFormation with serverless stack, REST, AWS API Gateway, Lambda, and S3. So let me just do an enter. So it's saying I will create a comprehensive YAML CloudFormation template for serverless stack with API Gateway, Lambda, and S3. So it's going to take a few minutes. Now it has created this CloudFormation template, and if I just scroll up, it's a pretty long one. Okay. Okay, here it is. And this is the path for this template where it has stored this template. And if I just scroll down, and it's saying create a comprehensive template for serverless stack with API Gateway, Lambda, and S3. So maybe I'll just say yes. So I've created a comprehensive CloudFormation YAML template for the serverless stack. Here is what the template includes. So it includes an S3 bucket with these configurations: S3 event notification trigger Lambda, public S3 blocked for security. For API Lambda, it handles API requests with the endpoint. So these three endpoints are there. And then S3 processor Lambda, and there are, and IAM, and it's also created the API gateway with the REST API gateway, IAM security, and then there are some other features that it has created, CloudWatch, log groups, and so on. Now to deploy this stack, API endpoints, this template is production ready with the proper security configuration error handling. So let me just go ahead and ask it to deploy. So I've just posed this question: deploy this template with stack name AWS MCP server on AWS CloudFormation. Okay, now we'll see that it's going to deploy this stack on AWS CloudFormation service. So it's asking me if I can just deploy this, and I will say yes. So I think it has found an error, and an error occurred, validation error, when calling the create stack operation. So it has a circular dependency, and I think it's going to fix the template by itself based on the error that it has seen. Now in the meantime, let's go to the CloudFormation service and let's see what's going on there. So from here, I will just search CloudFormation, and CloudFormation is here. So if I can just do a refresh. Okay, right now it has not deployed the stack. So let's see what's going on. Okay, so it's asking me that the fix circular dependency, and I will just say trust this time. So let me just say trust again. So it's saying now let me try deploying the fixed template. So it's fixed the template and it's going to try and deploy again. So it's now deploying serverless stack with MCP server. Okay, so it's saying deployment status, stack name, AWS MCP server, create in progress. Now let's go ahead and take a look at it from the CloudFormation service perspective. If I can just do a refresh here. Okay, now we can see it's deploying this AWS MCP server and create in progress. So if I just click on this, let me just move this a little left and let's say events. Okay, so I think something has failed. So it's saying API gateway invoke permission, property validation failed. Now what it's going to do is it's going to fix this issue by itself. So if I just go here, so it's saying the deployment is in progress. It's saying the stack is still in progress. Let me just do a trust. Soon it will realize that the stack has failed. It's again going to fix the stack and then deploy. So now you can see it's saying I see the stack is rollback. Let me check what went wrong by looking at the stack events. So it's figured out what's the issue and now it's going to try and deploy it again. So it's saying let me create the corrected template. If I just go back here, let's see what's going on here. Now it's saying that it can see what is the root cause and it's figured out the root cause. So it's saying let me wait for the rollback to complete and then deploy the fixed template. So now it's saying great, the rollback is complete and then it's going to delete the failed stack and then deploy a new one. So if you see from the console, the delete for this AWS MCP server is now done. Now it's going to deploy a new stack. So I waited about 5 minutes and finally the queue CLI was able to create the CloudFormation template and also deploy it. So you can see here it's showing us AWS MCP server create complete. And if I can just refresh it, you can see it has created this particular template. And if I just go to the resources, you can see all the resources that it has created. So you can see here on the right, it has created the Lambda function, log group, API, gateway resource, method, IAM role, S3 bucket, and so on. So that's how you can create an AWS MCP CloudFormation server using Amazon Q CLI as the client and VS Code as the host. Okay, now before we end this lecture, please make sure you delete this stack. Although this is serverless, but it's always better to delete your resources. So I will just select this stack AWS MCP server, just click on this delete and just do a delete. It's possible that some of the resources may not get deleted like S3 bucket. Then you can just go to the S3 service and delete it from there. So it's showing delete in progress and I think most of the services it has already deleted here. Okay, so that's pretty much it from this lecture. I'll see you in the next lecture. Thank you.